We appreciate the fact that you are continuing to work through this new normal by having these type of discussions that are very important as we prepare for the legislature to come back. And so on behalf of all the people at Vanderbilt University and our colleagues across the campus at the Medical Center, congratulations and good luck with a great conference, and we look forward to participating. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nathan. I want to start off with introducing Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally and House Speaker Cameron Sexton for our first session today. Lieutenant Governor McNally has been a long-standing champion for Tennessee business community. He first answered the call to public service in Oak Ridge when he ran for the State House. After winning that election, he served 4 terms. It was the State House where he first served on the Finance, Ways, and Means Committee. His work on the Finance Committee in both the House and later the Senate would become his passion and where he made his greatest impact on the state. As chairman of the Finance, Ways, and Means Committee for a decade, McNally oversaw the Tennessee General Assembly's only constitutionally prescribed duty, the passing of a balanced budget. Recognized across the state as a finance and budget expert, McNally's leadership has been critical, keeping Tennessee's budget in balance and its credit AAA rated. With the reserve of over $1 billion, he's been crucial to help Tennessee through the pandemic, and we believe this will prove absolutely essential for Tennessee's ability to survive through it. In addition to his 26 years in Senate Finance, Ways, and Means Committee, McNally also served as chair of the Senate Education Committee in the 102nd and 103rd General Assembly and was elected lieutenant governor by his Senate colleagues in 2017 and served the string of leadership. Also, I'm going to take time to introduce Speaker Cameron Sexton, and then after this, we'll turn it over and let Lieutenant Governor McNally go first. Speaker Sexton on Friday assumed Speaker of the House on Friday, August 23rd, 2019. He was elected as the 83rd Speaker of the Tennessee House of Representatives. Known as a pragmatic conservative, fifth-generation Tennessean is currently in his 5th term serving the 25th House District, which includes Cumberland and Van Buren counties, as well as the city of Monterey in Putnam County. Sexton previously served as House Republican Caucus Chair for the first half of the 111th General Assembly. As Caucus Chair, Sexton expanded and grew conservative initiatives under the House Republican majority over the past 6 years. He also chaired the House Health Committee during the 109th and 110th General Assembly and has served Majority Whip during the 108th Tennessee General Assembly. He also has had a tremendous successful voting record with the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce and Industry in our major core issues, and we thank you both for your leadership. Lieutenant Governor.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And I don't know whether this is this technology is a little bit above my head. I don't know whether the picture's coming through or not. It's probably not. But we face a difficult time when we come back in June. We had cut
Lieutenant Governor, could you unmute again? We're sorry about this.
Okay. How about that? Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. We can hear you right now. Thank you.
Okay.
And you.
Thank you. Bradley, I appreciate it and appreciate Vandy's support of this chamber conference with Nathan and others, but we face a very difficult time this year. We ended up last year cutting about $1 billion from the budget, and it looks like in this coming year we'll have to cut probably over $1 billion. We'll have to close out this year, and then in this coming year we'll have to make the cuts. Probably in closing this year, we'll take a lot of the reserve funds, if not all of them, as we did in 2008, 2009. And then we face what I would say would probably be north of about 1.2 billion in additional cuts we'll have to make. And that's where we get into the bone. I think we've already trimmed the fat and most of the meat, so we'll be into the bone of the budget. We can't cut certain things, such as education, funding through the BEP. Also, there are a number of other things that we will be unable to cut, and certainly to the extent that we can fund things with one-time money for a year, we might try that as we did in 2008, 2009. I might mention probably in the 42 some odd years that I've been in the legislature that this is the worst budget crisis that we've faced. And I faced the one in 2001, 2002, and then the one, most recent one in 2008, 2009. On the issue of the unemployment trust fund, we want to keep it above $1 billion, and that prevents additional assessments. There's an assessment that goes in, I think, around, if it drops to 900 million, another one if it's around 800 million. So we want to prevent that. So we want to make sure we keep that whole. And we have received some federal money, but to the extent that we've received the federal money, we've spent it through the COVID Relief Act. And certainly the last issue you had was liability. And I agree that we do need to provide a safe harbor for businesses to reopen. It would really, I think, hurt our economy a lot more if we did not provide that. And I know Chairman Bell and Judiciary, along with Leader Johnson and the Senator Yeager, who's the chairman of the caucus, this will be some of the issues that they'll be working on in the upcoming year, for the upcoming year. But I want to also thank the leadership of the House, in particular Speaker Sexton. When we had to close up in March, and had to make the cuts, he and his leadership staff and the Republican caucus on the House side did an excellent job, and it made the closure easy, and we were able to prevent any of our members getting ill, or any of the staff, or any of the visitors that we have. So I certainly somewhat look forward to June 1 when we come back. Finance will be meeting the Thursday prior to that. I believe it's May 28th, and probably be going over some of the budgetary issues. But thanks for having me, and I very much appreciate the work the Chamber does in encouraging businesses and encouraging growth in the economy in Tennessee.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Governor. We greatly appreciate you. Next, we'll go to Speaker Cameron Sexton. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Speaker.
Hey, well, thank you, Bradley. It's great to be here. And I heard birds chirping, I think, at Lieutenant Governor McNally's house, and I got lawnmowers out there mowing grass over here at my house. But it's great to be here. It's an honor to work alongside Lieutenant Governor McNally. We've been friends for a long time, and appreciate the leadership that he provides on the Senate side and everything that they do. And we are looking forward to working with them, especially on the budget, as we start preparing for June 1st and maybe a couple of weeks of session. As the Lieutenant Governor said, this current budget year, I think we can fill the hole with one-time money or rainy day fund money. The real crux of the problem will be next year's budget, where we'll have to, as he said, cut to the bone and really make some strong cuts on recurring expenses, and where you can't really use one-time money without jeopardizing the bond ratings of our state or us financially as well. I think one of the bigger issues that we're looking at as far as the budget revenue, we have a pretty good handle on what sales tax revenue is, and based on the data that comes in, that's pretty absolute. The franchise and excise taxes, I think, is where we're going to be a little bit hesitant on trying to predict what those are. And the main reason is businesses can adjust those and project those as they move forward, which is kind of a running total. It may take us about 12 to 18 months to see how the F&E taxes shake out. You know, as everybody's aware on this call, the governor deferred the F&E taxes, which is fine. But also when you look back in 2008 and 2009, when we were going through a similar situation on the budget, businesses were continuing to pay the full amount and they weren't projecting lower. And so what happened in 10 and 11 was a lot of tax credits going back on F&E, which caused us to have a budget shortfall there for a little bit of time. And when Governor Haslam came in, I think we had to cut $1 billion initially when he came in. So it's not unheard of for us to go back in and try to cut $1 billion over our budget. I think we're up to the task. The good news is, you know, the last 10 years under conservative Republican leadership, I think you've seen us put money in the rainy day fund and do things that are very conservative to set us up for a time like this where we have to make some cuts. But the good news is we don't have to raise taxes. I don't think we're going to have to raise taxes to get through this. I think we can manage through this situation as we move forward. So we'll start that process here in the next week or so as we go forward. Outside of the budget this time, I really think that, you know, we're still in the House focused on passing good public policy and what that looks like. You know, if a bill has a fiscal note, obviously it might be a little tough to get passed in this budget environment, but we're still kind of looking for some good policy and things that will help businesses get back on their feet, things that will reboot our economy, things that will help local government, maybe even some proposals to help education. And as Lieutenant Governor McNally mentioned about the liability issue that we may be passing for the businesses here in the next couple of weeks to give them protection against COVID-19 as we go through that. I know the Chamber and the NFIB and a lot of partners for this forum today are helping us navigate that path and coming up with language. So we're looking forward to getting back. I think our members are excited to get back on the House side. We always enjoy working with the Senate and doing our best to make Tennessee better. I think we're all on the same page on that, and we all want what's best for Tennessee. On the House side, we're concerned about making sure we protect our members and protect our staff. And we put in different things in the committee rooms and set up our schedules to not have people overlap and give us ample time to clean. And, you know, we're still working on the audio-visual system, which worked well last time when we weren't there. We're also putting things in place to protect the public and that sort of stuff on the House side. So we're looking forward to getting back. Hopefully we won't be too long. Hopefully we can get in and out. I think working on the next year's budget will be the thing that will take the longest for us as we try to figure out how to make the appropriate cut. So Bradley, I thank you for allowing me to be on this today. Appreciate everything that the Tennessee Chamber does for us out there, and appreciate Lieutenant Governor McNally and his leadership as well.
Thank you very much. And I would ask, we've got just a few minutes left. Maybe you all question, we've been getting some activity around legislative kind of protocols for considering legislation. You know, you all had to stop the session very quickly once the pandemic to kind of stop the spread of it and pass a budget. And there's a number of bills that are kind of hanging out there. Can you all give us some guidance, the things that you all will look at or you will not look at, maybe when you return on June the 1st?
Well, I think on the Senate side, we're going to take up the bills, one, that affect the budget, two, that are time sensitive, such as appointment resolutions, things like that. And number three would be the bills that are necessary due to the COVID epidemic. And we're going to try to, I think the Senate members are going to try to be responsible and limit themselves to those three issues. And then as quickly as we can to avoid the spread of the disease to any of our members or to the public, then we'll try to get through at a reasonable time.
And on the House side, Bradley, I think we're starting subcommittees next week. We'll have a better idea after next week. I think with the subcommittees and the 3 full committees that are meeting next week, we have about 391 bills in that process. Half of those probably have a fiscal note. So we're going to see what comes out of those subcommittees as we get there, and then reevaluate on June 1st. Our goal is still to try to pass as much good policy as we can. And, we might have a little broader scope than what the Senate does, but I think in the end, it will kind of all work itself out as far as things that have a fiscal note and so forth. What I will say is, as we move forward, the key is to pass a good budget, get the businesses back up and working, pass good legislation, and kind of see where we're at. We have about 110 bills, I think, in the House that the Senate has already passed. So we're looking at those bills. I think there's about 50 bills on the House side that we passed that the Senate hasn't passed. So I think we're kind of looking at those bills as well. The House may pass a few more bills just because we, looking through what the Senate's already passed. So, like always, we're willing to work with the Senate and work with the administration. I heard exactly what the administration is wanting to carry from the legislative package, so we're waiting to hear back from the governor on that.
All right, thank you all. Just time for one more question. I guess the general, in terms of policy with the public entering Cordell Hull, have you all finalized that yet? If not, how do you all see that playing out?
Well, I think on our side, we'd like to stick to what we did in March and just limit the access of individuals to the Capitol as well as to the Cordell Hull building, and I think we'll proceed in that direction. Of course, we'll work with the House leadership on their what they intend to do in the upcoming session.
Yeah, thanks, Bradley, and I agree with the Lieutenant Governor. We're 2 bodies, and sometimes the 2 bodies don't always agree, which is perfectly fine. We respect the Senate, and if there's certain things that they want to do or not do, that's perfectly fine. We're going to try our best, just like they would, to protect our staff and our members. I mean, that's first and foremost. We may allow a little bit more people in from the public than maybe the other side might want to do, and also what the Senate may want to do. We're working with the administration, Lieutenant Governor. I know Holt and Rick have been talking a lot over the last few days, and so the Lieutenant Governor and I. At the end of the day, the goal is, regardless of what happens in the Cordell Hull and who comes in or what safety precautions are put in place, at the end of the day, Lieutenant Governor and myself both want to protect the safety of anybody who's coming in and try to do the job efficiently and effectively, and really try to get us out in a few weeks and not be there for a long period of time. So I think in the end, we're trying to get to the same place and we have the same goal. We might just move a little bit differently getting there.
Well, thanks to each of you for joining us this morning, and I think some great input from both of you and some great responses to your questions. We look forward to seeing each of you next week, and good luck in the upcoming June session. Our next speaker is Secretary Trey Hargett. Certainly a big job ahead of him right now. Secretary Hargett was elected by the General Assembly to serve Tennessee as Tennessee's 37th Secretary of State in 2009. He was reelected in 2013 and then again in 2017. Secretary Hargett is the CEO of the Department of State with oversight for over 300 employees. He also serves on 15 boards and commissions, 2 of which he's the presiding member of those. The services and oversight found in Secretary of State's office reach every department and agency in state government. Secretary Hargett, you also have the distinction of administering, along with your administrator, Mark Goins, Tennessee elections, which you are here to talk a little bit about today. I'll turn it over to you now, Secretary Hargett. Thank you again for joining us.
Fantastic. Thank you for having me today. So can you hear me okay?
We can. Yes, we can, Secretary. Thank you.
It's good when technology works. Now, it's kind of awkward following Governor McNally and Speaker Sexton. It's kind of like watching a national championship game and then watching a lower tier bowl game after that. So I recognize that, but I will just assure the chamber members that we are so fortunate to have 2 seasoned, thoughtful leaders during this interesting time and challenging time in not only state government, but throughout our state. And it's been my privilege to serve alongside them in ways big and small in trying to make sure that we reboot this economy as well as keep our fellows safe. And so Governor Lee is fortunate to have them as partners. We as Tennesseans are fortunate to have them in the positions they're in. I will talk about elections, but some of you may have come in contact with us as you apply for PPP loans. We had a lot of activity from people calling us and emailing us trying to get the necessary information they had to be able to apply for PPP loans. And thanks to the governor's agreement and one of his executive orders, he allowed us to waive the usual fees that were in place whenever people were requesting us to send those documents. We recognized that time was of the essence, and we stepped up to the plate and did what we needed to be able to get done to help Tennessee businesses during this time of need. Now, more specifically, to talk about elections today, and I'm grateful you mentioned Mark Goins. I am convinced that we have the best elections in the country. He's nationally recognized by people on both sides of the aisle for how he approaches issues as a well sought after speaker on election issues. And he will tell you that he would have said this about 3 months ago, that now more than a lawyer and a coordinator of elections, he feels like an IT specialist, because if you'd asked me what our biggest concern was 3 months ago, I would have told you cybersecurity going into the upcoming elections. And it's still a large concern that we have, that those bad actors out there, foreign and domestic, might try and take advantage of the situation we're in and try to create havoc either through messing with our networks or more likely the misinformation that gets spread throughout the social media and other media out there. So, but he would tell you now he also feels like he's probably becoming a healthcare professor. And so there's a lot of different things we've got going on. I'm going to talk about misinformation to start with. If I could encourage you, and many of the people on this Zoom have been fantastic about helping us get out good information when it comes to voter registration, voter participation, how to utilize online voter registration, getting information up in their businesses about election dates, voter registration deadlines, how to request absentee ballots, et cetera. But one of the things that we are really concerned about is there's a lot of people out there, foreign and domestic, who intentionally put out bad information about when election days are, what hours of operation are, what it takes to get a ballot, what you need to be able to go and vote. And we fight that. And that's something that Democrats and Republicans across our country, through the National Association of Secretaries of State, we created a program earlier this year called Trusted Info 2020, trying to encourage people that if you want information about elections, go to your local election commission website, go to govotetn.com, go to trusted sources information. And I find that ironic, whenever people get ready to buy a mobile phone of some sort, they'll do a lot of research. When it comes to getting ready to cast their vote or prepare to go and vote, they don't do as much research. And so we're trying to get people to get their information from trusted resources. And I said intentionally, sometimes I think there's people who unintentionally put out bad information. There's one local lawyer who remained nameless, who one night put out something on Twitter that talked about make sure you update your voter registration, because if it's not current, your voter registration might expire. And I sent them a direct message back and I said, hey, I'm unfamiliar with a voter registration expiring. What does that mean? And she came back, she says, well, I probably shouldn't have said it that way. That really wasn't an accurate term. And I shouldn't have said that. Well, that tweet still exists out there. She never took it down or anything. And that's a lawyer. So, you know, people tend to think that she would be the kind of person who have good information. And so we're constantly battling that. Whenever people put out bad information, people, even unintentionally, they don't take it back down. So we have tried to really put out a lot of good information and be proactive with individuals and businesses around our state, getting good information in the hands of Tennessee voters. Now, probably the more of the subject at hand that everybody wants to talk about is thinking about how do you prepare for an election during COVID-19? And so keep in mind, during the last legislative session, during the waning days, during the legislature's time there in March, there were conversations about expanding absentee voting and actual amendments that were filed. And those amendments failed. And so Mark Goins and I and the election commissions around the state have worked to put together a plan that we can run elections under during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have to do so under current law. You know, it's kind of like if I said right now, hey, I want to be in Memphis within an hour, but I want to drive, it's really not possible. But, you know, the only resource I have available to me right now is a car. So what I have to go do is do the best that I can in the current situation. So we're embracing the challenge of trying to do that. And so we have a lengthy document that we have distributed across media and to election commissions throughout the state and legislators about how to run this election under the current laws that we have. So what I want to make sure of is that people understand that our first goal is to make sure we keep the election workers, the poll officials, and voters around this state safe. That's the thing that we are most concerned about. And so I will tell you, if you have been going to Walmart or Lowe's or Home Depot or Target, so I'm trying to be careful not to put any more information out there than necessary. But when I talk about retailers, I know I could get in trouble in a hurry. So I'm sorry, our smoke detector is going off. That's kind of throwing me off. It's going to be safer to go to the polls than it is to go to your local retail outlet. I mean, we are working to make sure we have these places appropriately clean, that everybody has the necessary PPE. At the suggestion of the Department of Health, we're going to ask voters to be wearing the mask inside. We're going to have disposable items there so people are not going to be touching the machines. You know, that they'll be able to use Q-tips or popsicle sticks to be able to touch the machines with those and dispose of those appropriately, even thinking about disposable pens to make sure that the same person doesn't touch pens. So we're doing those things, also preparing for social distancing at the polls and encouraging local election commissions to think about several different things. Number one, expand the number of early voting sites. You know, if you have one right now, think about having 2, 3, or 4. Think about the size of those sites. You know, if we're going to practice good social distancing, we need to have sites that are large enough to be able to accommodate a maximum number of election workers, as well as voters, to be able to accommodate as many people as possible and while achieving social distancing. So talk about sites, talk about space, and also about the hours of voting. So, you know, not every county out there utilizes early voting to the maximum hours that they can. And on election day, not every county is open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Central, 8 a.m. Eastern to 8 p.m. Eastern. So thinking about spreading those voters out so we can achieve maximum social distancing, because we want people to have confidence when they go to the polls. It's going to be as safe as it can possibly be. We want them to be safe. We want our election workers to be safe. So, but not just that, we're also working right now to make sure that people are able to absentee vote that are currently eligible under one of the 14 eligibility ways under state law. The ones that people typically know about are as if you're out of town. You know, if you're going to be out of town during early voting during election day, then you might want to go ahead and absentee vote. But a lot of people don't realize if you are 60 and above, you can vote absentee without excuse. In fact, that is your excuse if you're over 60. And certainly if you're sick or hospitalized or caring for someone who is, those are the most common ones. But the state are in the habit of voting in person. And so while there are other states out there that have made the progression over many years from voting in person to absentee to voting by mail, we still, as a state, during a typical election, are under 2% of the people vote absentee. Put another way, over 98% of the people who typically vote in the Tennessee election vote in person, either during early voting or on election day. During the last presidential election, 2.5% of the people cast an absentee ballot. But we are, in an effort to try and spread out the voters, to achieve social distancing and to make sure people know what opportunities they have, we're advertising on Facebook right now and seeing a lot of interest in people over 60 who are filing to their absentee ballot request. The county says they've already hit a record number of absentee ballot requests. And that's going to be something that I think we're going to see throughout the state, is people who did not know they had that opportunity are going to seek out that opportunity. But it's interesting to know, as we get information around the state, we tend here in Middle Tennessee, and especially in Nashville and Davidson County, we think about the pandemic and how it's affecting us. And we probably look at some other urban areas, probably Memphis next, and think about maybe Knoxville to some degree. But there's 90 plus other counties out there that feel like they're having a very different experience with things. And so we're trying to make sure that we give those election officials the tools they need with hand sanitizer, appropriate PPE, and the messaging that they can get out to what they're doing to protect safety. But, when I look at the other counties out there, we're hearing a lot of messages from people about how they are not as concerned about safety. And so we're fighting that tide too, trying to make sure that people understand we're asking you to wear a mask to the polls, wearing a mask if you're an election worker, wearing that mask is not necessarily about protecting you, it's about protecting the people you are coming in contact. And so we're fighting that as well. If you were to ask me the thing that keeps me up the most at night, though, the thing that when I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, I think about is making sure that we have enough poll workers around the state. And we're going to be rolling out a program here pretty soon, encouraging younger people to work the poll, encourage people to do what we call do their patriot duty, and be a poll worker. And so we're also working on labor workforce development, and hopefully going to be able to help people come work on early voting on election day and reach out to others how to make that happen. So with that said, though, when you think about if you've been to vote in person, you probably have seen the average age of poll workers out there is what I say is about 66 years old. Mark Goins corrected me the other day and says it's 68. If you think about the people who are most likely to not want to work during this current time, it's probably those individuals. And so while around the state, we're seeing a lot of people who are saying, yeah, we're certainly going to come work. Here, maybe in the more urban areas, there has been more of a reluctance to. And so, but not as much as some might anticipate, but still, we'd rather be over-prepared and have as many workers as possible, because we not only have to work the polls, if we're going to see an increase in the number of absentee ballots, we've got to have a way to process all of those. And we can't start counting those ballots before election day. And so there's a lot of prep work that also goes into that. So we're going to have people prepping ballots. You'd be surprised at how ballots will come back to us. They'll have coffee stains on them. They'll be folded like origami. We've got to be able to get all those flattened out and be prepared to be able to run through the scanning equipment that we're purchasing for counties across the state to be able to process a much higher number of absentee ballots than we've ever seen before. So those are just a handful of things that we're worried about. What I'm hopeful of is that come August, people look at me and Mark Goins and say, wow, you really over-prepared for that, and you were worried about nothing. I hope that's the case. But our job is to be worried so everybody else doesn't have to be. So I would much rather us be over-prepared than unprepared. And we're taking those same precautions for November as well, because we don't know what the future holds. And as you and your businesses have learned, you'd much rather be over-prepared for something that doesn't happen than underprepared for something that does. So I appreciate the time and courtesy that you've given me to talk for a few minutes today. If I had a request of any of you, is if you know people who are over 60 years of age or who are sick, hospitalized, and have a reason to vote absentee, tell them to go ahead and get that absentee ballot request into us. We'd rather get those in early, go ahead and get those ballots out to them now, so they can go ahead and get those ballots back to us so they don't get caught in the mail. Because what we're seeing in a lot of places around the country is the United States Postal Service has not been prepared for the influx of ballots. And in fact, in Wisconsin, which conducted their election both in person and by mail, you know, there are bins full of ballots that were never shipped out or never returned back to the election commission. We want to avoid that. So, and listening to experts around the country, we have a real concern about the United States Postal Service ability to process all those by mail ballots. And also, the second request I have is if you know of people who are willing to work the polls, if they're a registered voter, and it's not a Republican thing, a Democrat thing, or independent, we need people of all political affiliations. Contact their local election commission and be willing to work the polls. And, you know, it's a way to make a little money, but more than anything, I think it will give you a greater appreciation for civic engagement and what it goes into running an election. And now more than ever, we need poll workers. So those are my two asks, and I appreciate your time and courtesy today and appreciate how you are represented on Capitol Hill. I have watched Bradley Jackson. He and I kind of grew up together, from me as a freshman legislator and him at his time as a lobbyist on Capitol Hill. And it is really appreciated how the chamber represents the business interest in the state of Tennessee. So I think I've got a couple of minutes left. I'm not sure how my time's allotted. Glad to try and take a couple of questions if anybody has any.
Sure, Secretary. We will ask you a couple of questions since you're willing to take a couple of those. Specifically, how can businesses, and we've got lots of associations on this meeting with us today, how can we help advocate some of these things for you? What are some specific ideas, especially since things have changed a little, but also just get out the vote campaigns? Do you have any specific recommendations there?
Well, I couldn't ask for a setup better than that. So if you go to our govotetn.com website, we have what's called a Your Vote Matters campaign. And we have all kinds of materials that we're willing to help you send out to your business, and also have things that we can help you set up to be able to send out electronically. So, you know, especially during this time where a lot of people working AWS, or working remotely, I should say, you know, for people that you can put out in emails and newsletters to let people know about key election dates, about how they can get involved. If you go to our website and sign up for the Your Vote Matters campaign, we will get you all the materials you ever want and more to be able to help you better engage your employees. Because it's one thing for me to stand up and say we need poll workers, but if the people you work with on a much more frequent basis than I do hear from you, that's going to make a huge impact.
Thank you, Secretary, for being here today. We really appreciated it. Up next, we have Bill Kramer, and it's my pleasure to introduce Bill Kramer. Bill, if you want to share, you're already ahead of the game. You already shared your screen. Thank you. Bill joined the Council of State Chambers in 2012 and serves as the Deputy Executive Director. Bill is Vice President of Policy at Multi-State Associates, a Virginia-based state and local government affairs firm. His previous experience includes the U.S. Senate, California Assembly, and Legislative Council's Office of California. Bill earned his bachelor's degree in history from Ohio University and his Juris Doctor from the University of Pacific McGeorge School of Law, where he served as managing editor of the Law Review. Bill is a member of the State Bar of California and a certified association executive. Thanks, Bill. We're happy to have you here.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
We can.
So that I think is I'm trying to share my screen, but it says you cannot share screen while others are sharing. So that initial screen wasn't mine. I think it was a placeholder.
Oh, okay. Can you try again?
Oh, there it goes.
Perfect.
Bear with me for a second.
Nope, totally fine.
Can you see that?
We can. It's a
Excellent. All right.
very pretty landscape scene you have there.
Can you see the first slide?
No.
All right, one second. Apologies.
It might be when you clicked share screen, did you click
Yeah, I think I did desktop instead.
Okay.
How about now?
Still don't see anything. Do we? Hey, Bill, if you just want to go ahead and get started and we'll pull it up on our end.
Yeah, that's fine. Apologize for that.
Thank you.
So thank you, Bradley and the Tennessee Chamber for having me. Again, I'm Bill Kramer. I'm Deputy Executive Director at the Council of State Chambers, which is the umbrella organization for all of the state chambers of commerce around the country. So a couple things that I was asked to cover today, and once we get the slides up, we'll go in a little bit more detail, but kind of an outline of what I plan on talking about with you all today is a couple of worker protection expansions that have come in the light of the pandemic and as a reaction to that. We'll cover unemployment insurance, workers' compensation. We'll take a look at how states are reopening. And finally, we'll take a look at liability protections for businesses themselves. So I'll give them just a minute to get those slides up. But you know, there's been a lot of reactions since March when this kind of pandemic really took off, with the states taking the priority of closing down a lot of the businesses, and then the federal government jumping in primarily through some actions that Congress has done, and the big one being the CARES Act, which has a large number of unemployment insurance benefits added on, as well as some other protections primarily for healthcare workers. Okay, here we go. So this is kind of where we're at, kind of outlining what I was going to talk about. You can go to the next slide from this. All right, so starting off with unemployment insurance. Every state has acted to modify their unemployment insurance program in some way. And listed here is kind of some common ways that states have worked to change their program in the wake of the pandemic to help shore up unemployment benefits for workers in their states and new beneficiaries. So they've expanded benefits. A lot of times they've waived the waiting week to receive benefits. Waiving work search requirements is also something that's been happening a lot. Authorizing work share programs, which allow unemployed individuals to collect UI benefits, underemployed individuals, I'm sorry. And then providing benefits for quarantined workers, ensuring that the UI experience rating are not changed for COVID-19 related layoffs. So these are some of the things that states themselves are doing. And I know that you and Tennessee and some of your neighboring states have taken a number of these actions. So if we move to the next slide, this is primarily what the federal government has done on unemployment insurance, and it's pretty big. So under the CARES Act, which passed in March, there's an additional $600 per week in benefits. That's kind of the big headline number. There's also federal funding for states that have short time or shared work programs. So these work share programs, it helps add federal funding for those so that people can continue to work, but maybe at less hours. And this funding will help supplement their income so that they're not hit as hard with less hours and staying on the payroll. And finally, they created a temporary program for self-employed individuals These are people with like independent contractors and kind of the rise of the gig economy. So if you think of like an Uber driver, there's now a program for them to help them out with unemployment insurance. So those are the changes that the federal government has made on unemployment. And really the worry at this point is to keep those state UI funds funded. You know, a lot of them got underfunded during the Great Recession and took a long time and had to take a lot of loans from the federal government. So these state UI funds, the concern here is to keep them funded and not get into debt with the federal government that could take a long time to repay, which then could, you know, end up being more of a tax on employers to refund that. So if you go to the next slide, this will switch gears from UI to workers' comp. And the primary concern here is on presumption. So some states have established or considering adopting a presumption that a worker who comes down with COVID-19 contracted the disease at the workplace, thus making them eligible for workers' compensation. So the thinking behind this and the motivation is the concern to provide income support while a worker is out sick, potentially with COVID-19. But as you can imagine, if you move to the next slide, there's a lot of concerns about this. Luckily, most states have limited this presumption to kind of first responders. So hospital workers, corrections officers, people in the medical profession that are coming into direct contact as part of their job with sick patients. 5 states have passed legislation and 18 states have taken executive action to create such a presumption. And again, these are mainly for first responders, but there's some exceptions. So if you move to the next slide, this is just kind of a handful of locations, a sampling of where the presumption has been applied more broadly. So your neighbors to the north in Kentucky, there is an executive order there that extends the presumption to grocery store workers who are, you know, an essential business, and those workers are coming into contact potentially with sick individuals. In California, the executive order applies the presumption to all employees who report to their workplace, meaning anyone outside of the home. So anyone that's not working, the presumption applies to them for workers' comp purposes. And finally, in Wyoming, fairly similar to California, applies to all workers in the state. And that could bring some questions later on, especially as businesses are going through the reopening process. It was one question when, you know, a majority of businesses were ordered to shut down or to only operate remotely. But now that a lot are opening back up outside of what states have defined as essential businesses, it changes this question. So going to the next slide, that's kind of the highlight here, the litigation risk. Government has essentially said that your workplace is dangerous because it's presuming that anybody that comes down with the virus got it while at the workplace versus anywhere else that they might have been, including at home or out in the public. So this will be Exhibit A in any future lawsuits by customers, vendors, contractors, anybody that has contact with potential workplace. So we move to the next slide. Reopening states is kind of the big thing right now. And the thing it's important to remember when you talk about states reopening is that not everyone closed down to the same degree or in the same timeline. So every state's going to be opening up differently and with different timelines. So my friends at Multi-State Associates, which is a state GR firm, kind of put together this scoring system based on 11 different factors on which industries are opening, how open they are, things like that. So what you're seeing on the screen on this map is basically an indication the darkest blue states are the most closed right now, while the lightest blue states are the most open. So if you take a look at Tennessee, you're kind of wedged in here between some moderately closed states up north and to the east, and some pretty open states to the south and to the west. So Tennessee is kind of, I would say, put it kind of middle ground as far as reopening. And we'll kind of get into maybe why that is in a minute. So if we move to the next slide, this is kind of a snapshot of your neighboring states and kind of how they racked up in this scoring system that multi-state put together on their openness score. So the score goes from 0, which is completely closed, to 100, which is pretty much as open as you can be at this state of the game. So you can see some of your neighbors, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, are pretty open with fairly high scores, while Kentucky and North Carolina are both a little bit more closed, although I know they've made announcements that they'll be opening up more broadly soon. And Tennessee, again, kind of sits there ranked in the middle, kind of at a half-open state. So if you go to the next slide, we'll kind of get into why Tennessee is kind of in a half-open state. And, your stay-at-home order expired at the end of April. Professional services, business, office spaces are mostly open, but a lot of these specialty industries, retail, personal care services, so like barbers and salons, gyms, restaurants, they're all open at a 50% capacity. And Tennessee has decided to open at kind of a regional way. So different counties are on different timelines, with the first 89 counties or so opening first, and some of the more populous counties where maybe the virus is more prevalent, opening on a slower timeline. So again, that's just kind of a snapshot of the reopening and how Tennessee compares to its neighbors and some of the places around the country. So finally, the next slide, the last thing I kind of want to talk about, which kind of falls into the, if you're going to reopen, if businesses are being told that they can reopen, are they subject to lawsuits if their employees or customers get sick? So OSHA has told businesses to follow the CDC guidelines about how to reopen. Also, most states that have gone through a reopening process and then are in the different phases of reopening have put out their own guidelines, either as mandates or recommendations for different industries. So retail, you're allowed to open at 50% capacity. You have to have, 6 feet between people. You have to close down things like food courts and anywhere where people can congregate. These are recommendations that have followed. Do we know that if they adhere to this, if businesses adhere to this, are they protected against legal liability? So this is a big concern of the business community. The Senate President Mitch McConnell has stated that liability protection will be absolutely essential in any discussion for further federal recovery legislation. So this is a top priority of the Senate leadership for anything coming down potentially in Congress. But the states are acting too. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that 24 states plus DC have already enacted legislation or an executive order extending legal liability protection, especially for healthcare providers. So again, the kind of first people that are being protected from these things are those that are being kind of first into contact with sick individuals as part of their job. So here's a handful of states that have done this. So your neighboring states in Alabama, they also have protected businesses outside of the healthcare providers. Arkansas has only protected healthcare providers so far. Kentucky protects healthcare providers and businesses that produce PPE. So anybody that has kind of converted their business to help produce equipment to help protect those healthcare providers, in Kentucky, they are protected from liability. And then finally, in North Carolina, protects healthcare providers, but also volunteer organizations and any of those initial essential businesses, those businesses that were designated essential during the first stage of their stay-at-home order and were asked to continue operations. So things like grocery stores. And then if we move to the final slide here, this is actually just a quick map of where those protections have been put into place. You can see that Tennessee is kind of surrounded by a little island of states that have put this in. The darker states are executive order, and the lighter green states were enacted by legislation. And this is primarily to protect healthcare providers. So keep that in mind. But it's probably something that your lawmakers are gonna want to address when they come back in session soon. So if you go to the final slide, just kind of my wrap up. So that is kind of the presentation. Happy to answer any questions. So again, thank you for having me, and feel free to Tennessee Chamber has my contact. So if you come up with any questions, you can definitely email me, or they can get the questions to me, and I can be sure to expand on them and answer any questions.
All right. Thank you, Bill, very much. We greatly appreciate that information and the great work that you all do in managing the Council of State Chambers. It's a very valuable resource for us in chamber leadership to know what all is happening in other states and for us to be able to make policy decisions. Next, we are shifting over on to our legislative chairman's panel discussion. And with us today, we have Senator Paul Bailey, Senator Mike Bell, Representative Clark Boyd, Representative Michael Cercio, and Representative Robin Smith. Thank you all for joining us today. I will say these legislators have been picked primarily for the significant role that they play in either reviewing or hearing or initiating policy that greatly impacts Tennessee's business community. So oftentimes their committees are absolutely at the tip of the spear, and each one of these legislators have demonstrated their commitment toward Tennessee's economic growth and maintaining a very strong business environment for our small, medium, really all businesses across the state through their various committees. I would ask each and every one of you, and I think I'll go ahead and ask Representative Smith if you'd like to go first, and then each one of you, just to kind of flow through. We can either go alphabetically, whoever. If I don't hear from you, I'll call on you. But I do want, please give us, a brief introduction, your committee, kind of your district, and also throughout the COVID outbreak. I know each one of you have heard compelling stories or challenges that businesses in your district have faced, and also some success stories or cases when your constituents have really stepped up and met challenges in your communities. And describe any of those examples for us. And the second question that we'll try to get to is just starting to think about legislative policy and some of the things that you all are interested in. But to that first question, Representative Smith, we'll start with you. And thank you all so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us.
All right, thanks, Bradley, and thanks to the Chamber for all that you do. Robin Smith, I'm a freshman, Tennessee House District 26. My district is a mixture of rural and downtown in Chattanooga. I go from the St. John's Restaurant, which also includes the aquarium, the Medal of Honor Heritage Center, the Children's Discovery Museum, a lot of really large attractions in Tennessee, including the Tennessee River, all the way over to the North Shore, up both sides of the Tennessee River to the rural spaces in Harrison and Hickson, almost to Soddy Daisy. So we've had quite a different mixture. A lot of small businesses have been impacted, and I'm very honored to serve at the pleasure of House Speaker Cameron Sexton as the Insurance Committee, the Chairman of Insurance. One of the key challenges that I'm seeing small businesses as well as large businesses is to really strive to protect their payroll, their workers, now navigating new channels. This has become the era of adaptability, and you're going to find that those who are quickly able to adapt and embrace the Tennessee Pledge, as well as be creative by moving into virtual work, by also offering a different platform on how you engage with your patients as well as your customers. Those are going to be the businesses that change and survive. But one key example, we've got a restaurant here in Hickson. It was the Rebel Drive-In from years ago. Mike Bell will know what that is. Up in Cleveland, it was a subsidiary of that, but 37 years ago, it became Carl's Drive-In or Carl's Restaurant. It was forced to be closed, a favorite meet and three here in the district. and kind of a stomping ground for all politicos and business people. And it was, the doors were shuttered within a couple of days after, I want to say they made it for 32 days and could not sustain the payroll, didn't get the PPP. And so really faced some struggles. But then I look also a great success story of the Medal of Honor Heritage Center. Its doors just opened in February, but they took an online learning opportunity, created a virtual classroom, a virtual curriculum, and began introducing traits of leadership into the curriculum of folks that were trying to educate their kids. And suddenly they have a reason to exist, and they're opening their doors on Friday, or actually tomorrow. So it's a challenging time, and I look forward to hearing from Bradley and taking questions, but I think that we all agree it's a very difficult time. Our big obstacle is going to be to make sure that we encourage consumer confidence without embracing the wrong new normal, air quote, because if we embrace the wrong new normal, we will never see our economy return to the vibrant economy, which was the envy of all the nation here in Tennessee. But thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Representative Smith. We'll now go to Senator Paul Bailey to make sure we balance the House and the Senate. Senator Bailey, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the call. Paul Bailey, I represent the Upper Cumberland area, which includes Sparta, Cookeville, Crossville, Pikeville, Livingston, and Gainsboro, and we're basically coming back. I feel like that our stores have embraced the governor's executive orders as far as the way that we reopen. Our people are anxious to go back to work. Several of our restaurants especially have been in contact with me concerned about the unemployment insurance that employees are receiving, especially if they're receiving the $875, $275 from the state, $600 from the federal government. They're having a hard time getting those employees back into the workplace. And so I appreciate the Department of Labor actually creating a portal on their website to where those employers can go in and basically state that they're calling those individuals back to work. But that's one of the concerns that we've had. Restaurants trying to get back up to the full capacity by the end of this week, getting those employees back into place. And it's not just been restaurants. I've heard from other industries as well that they're having a difficult time bringing those employees back into the workplace. Most of you know that I'm in the trucking business as far as my day job. And what I can say about that is that we run from Tennessee all the way to the West Coast, being California, Washington State, all the way to the East Coast, being as far north as Northeast as Maine, and then as far south as Florida. And a few weeks ago, the produce market, those farmers were really suffering. They did not have a market to send their produce to. In the past 2 weeks, we have seen those markets begin to open back up. And I think it's simply because more states are opening up their economies again, and so they actually have a place to go with their fresh vegetables. We had seen a 20% decrease in the amount of freight volume that we normally have at this time of the year. We have now rebounded back, and we are at normal capacity. So I think that Tennessee will bounce back sooner than a lot of the other parts of the country because we're resilient people, and our folks really want to get back to work.
Thank you very much, Senator Bailey. Greatly appreciate your comments. Next, we'll go to Representative Clark Boyd. Representative Boyd, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Bradley. Appreciate you guys putting this together today, and appreciate all of your hard work and everything that you do, and just you're a very valuable resource for us in the legislature. And so I appreciate that. I live in Lebanon, Tennessee, and I represent the eastern part of Wilson County. I have all of Cannon County and a small portion of DeKalb County. And probably like a lot of the rest of the state, a lot of our small businesses have been hit pretty hard. Those folks that own gyms, barbershops, salons, and folks that work in the hospitality industry. And just to sort of echo what Senator Paul Bailey said, you know, the $600 a week from the federal government, it was very well intentioned, but the unintended consequence is that a lot of those workers that are making less than roughly $22 an hour, they're making more money unemployed than they were working. And so a lot of those small businesses took advantage of the PPP. And once they secured the funds and called their employees thinking that they had some good news and you know, inviting them to come back to work, they figured out real quick that a lot of those folks didn't want to come back to work. And so a lot of them are working through that right now. And I think a lot of restaurants are having to make some decisions, because I don't work in that industry, but I'm told that a lot of their profit margin is in, you know, when they get above 75% capacity. And so if they're operating less than that, it's really difficult for them to break a profit. It's my understanding. One of the success stories that I saw in my district, and I think it just goes to that Tennessee ingenuity and entrepreneurial spirit, is a friend of mine that had a painting business, very successful painting business nationwide. And like everyone, they saw a tremendous decrease. A lot of contracts that they had already agreed upon got canceled, and they were in the process of laying some people off. And they recognized that there was going to be a new industry pop up for disinfecting a lot of high volume places, whether it be restaurants or just anywhere that a lot of people go. And so they pretty quickly tooled up, got the personal protective equipment. These looked to me like hazmat suits, and got disinfectants. And now they're going in at night and they're disinfecting restaurants and a lot of places like that. And so it was pretty exciting to see him be able to pivot and adapt to this, to the COVID-19 and find a way to make his business fit a need that just popped up pretty much overnight. And so, again, Bradley, thanks for having us on there, and look forward to taking some more questions here in a moment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Next, we'll go to Senator Mike Bell. Senator Bell, thank you for joining us today. And I think you may be muted.
Uh-oh.
There it goes. Gotcha.
Okay. Thank you, Bradley. This is the first time I've ever been on a Zoom conference call, so I'm assuming everything is coming through as it should. I represent Southeast Tennessee, 5 counties that border North Carolina and Georgia, so I have the southeast corner of the state. I represent Cleveland, which Representative Smith lives in Chattanooga, which is becoming a suburb of Cleveland. We are doing well and growing up in this area. Bradley, I want to mention the success story to start with, and many of you may have a mask that is made here in Cleveland. We had a textile manufacturer who offered and was able to use a word that Representative Boyd used, pivot, and go from making socks to making masks. And I believe we've had about 5 million of those made and being distributed around the state. So it was good to see them be able to do that. And Bradley, I want to mention a problem that if it is not becoming prevalent in our state, we're going to start hearing more and more about it. I just heard from a constituent about 3 days ago who owns the largest drywall company in Cleveland. OSHA requires them to use the N95 mask, and they cannot get any because all those masks are going to our healthcare providers. And I understand that, but if the drywall and other construction groups that are required by OSHA to wear these masks can't get them, then our construction industry goes down, home building goes down, commercial construction goes down, which so much of our economy is based on. That's something that I've already spoken to the governor's office about, haven't gotten a satisfactory answer yet on what we can do to help them. But that's something that I would like to see the legislature take up and see what we might be able to do in the next few weeks to address that. Bradley, I want to mention also that I'm sitting in my truck. I don't know how much y'all can see, but I'm sitting in my truck. I'm self-employed. My boss only's given me a short time to eat lunch so I can get back on the job. But the same dynamic, it's interesting. I pressure wash houses for a living and clean windows on houses. The same dynamic that has had Lowe's and Home Depot's parking lot full every time you go by has had people calling me. And I've got several other friends who are in the cleaning business who are just staying covered up right now. It's interesting that all the people who have had to stay home, they've looked around their houses and decided we need a little work done, which has been great for not only me, but really for anybody in the cleaning business.
All right. Thank you very much, Senator Bell. It's always important to have a citizen legislature here and you all knowing what's happening on the ground. We'll go now to Representative Curcio. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Bradley. Appreciate all the work that you all do. Michael Curcio, and I represent the 69th District of Tennessee, which is kind of like Chairman Smith was saying. I've got everything from areas that really consider themselves more suburbs of Nashville, and kind of walk and talk like a bigger town, you know, closer to a big city, all the way to constituents who are very rural. A lot of cattle industry where I am, a lot of big farms, and folks who are, you know, consider themselves to be very rural Tennesseans. So my district really has run the gamut from kind of their, you know, reaction and how much it has impacted them during this crisis. Some folks have really never missed a beat. You know, they're out on the farm and they're going about their daily lives. A lot of trades folks in my district who really find themselves to be busier now than they ever have been before, like Senator Bell mentioned. My family has been in the builder supply and timber business. We'll be celebrating our 100th anniversary next year in that industry, and so we operate lumber yards and builder supply businesses all around Nashville and Middle Tennessee and southern Kentucky. And I can tell you that business has not slowed at all. In fact, a lot of it has ramped up. Now, if you're building a big subdivision with, you know, curb and gutter and it's a lot of spec homes, that has taken a breath. But as far as the independent guy doing a high-end remodel or building a house for an individual customer, those kinds of things, that stuff has not stopped. So it's been interesting to see. Another phenomenon that I've observed is very rural county in my district, Hickman County, has about an 80% give or take out commute rate, I would say, just rough math. So a lot of the folks who are earning larger paychecks in that community are traveling to Dixon County, Davidson County, Murray County, Williamson County to work. And as a result of that, under a typical circumstance, they're buying their groceries, they're going to Lowe's, they're doing all those things that they would need to do while they're out at work, making those purchases out of county and then bringing those goods back home. Well, speaking with my county mayor over there, they have seen a huge uptick in local revenue because of the stay-at-home order, because Hickman Countyans are shopping at the local grocery store, going to the, you know, Dollar General and those sorts of things, rather than spending those dollars in Williamson County and Davidson County and so forth. So that was certainly an unintended consequence, but kind of a unforeseen positive that has come out of it for this. Briefly, I've got in my personal business, so I told you about my family, what we do as a family, but my personal business in the employee benefits and HR consulting world, we've got about 850 group clients under management in about 23 states, everything from two-person mom and pops up to our largest employer has about 3,000 employees. And I'll give you one story of a boat manufacturer that I work with. They make, you know, $80,000-$100,000 center console deep sea fishing boats. These are definitely luxury items. You know, they were almost at day one saying, okay, we're going to have to lay everybody off. We were able to mobilize and educate them on the PPP loans. And Can you guys still hear me? I just got a text maybe that I dropped off.
Yes, we still have you.
Okay, sorry. So we were able to mobilize and help them with a PPP loan so that they could keep their folks on staff, and they even made themselves available to the state because they've got sewers and sewing machines to say, hey, can we start making masks and gowns and anything that might be needed for first responders. So not only a success story there that they were able to keep those employees employed, but also just that Tennessee volunteer spirit saying, hey, put us to work. What can we do to help?
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And we'll actually kind of stick with you and go back in the reverse order as we go on to our next questions. But it's very observant. You're right. We saw in terms of revenue collections, the state sales and use tax dropped overall about 6%, but local governments dropped only less than one percentage point, at least 0.8. So has been an interesting trends that we've seen. Shifting to our next question, and I'm going to kind of combine these. You all, as leaders in your respective committee in different kind of industry sectors, what are a couple of key issues that you believe your committee will look at, and then also overall for the Tennessee General Assembly in terms of business activity or ways to help business during this pandemic? What are any thoughts you all have about policies that the legislature will consider? Representative Curcio, and then we'll go to Senator Bell.
Sure. Thank you. Obviously, the liability protections that were discussed, before the panel started, will be a huge focus for our Judiciary Committee. I, being in the employee benefits business, was very concerned early on that we might, while well-intentioned, be tempted to go down a road on the workers' comp side that would actually be harmful to business in this state. And so I'm heartened that there's folks, like the Chamber and the NFIB and others that have been working on really a well-balanced approach and one that'll really be pro-business. And so I think that'll be a huge piece that we look at. Another thing, and I don't know what the prospects of it are, but I actually owned a restaurant at one time and have several friends and colleagues who are still in the hospitality industry. And one of the things that we've been looking at that they've been concerned with is right now they're able to deliver alcohol to their customers. And so if my parents, for example, who are immunocompromised, want to order dinner, they can pick up curbside, a bottle of wine plus their dinner or something like that, and be able to take it back home. And also those restaurants are able to deliver under the executive order. And the concern is that going back, quote, to normal may actually be worse for them than their current situation, because while they may be free to open up at a normal capacity, you may have folks like my parents who maybe feel like it's unsafe for them to get out. So then the question is, do we want them to miss out on that sale versus, saying that they can no longer do this curbside, that kind of thing. So that's something that I've been looking at. I don't know what the political appetite will be to try to address that, to maybe extend some of those type provisions for businesses. But certainly the liability protection will be a huge piece. And then anything coming through judiciary, a lot of the criminal justice reform initiatives that we have that I'm carrying on behalf of the governor, they save quite a bit of money. So while they may not seem related to COVID-19 specifically, what better time than to come up with some smart public policy that also happens to save, something on the order of $50, $60, $70 million.
Thank you very much. Senator Bell, we'll go to you next.
Thank you, Bradley. And Chairman Curcio has already mentioned, since I chair Judiciary in the Senate, he's already mentioned the bill that we're going to be focusing on more than any, and it's the liability bill. Been working with the Chamber, NFIB, healthcare companies, long-term healthcare groups. We hope it will be a comprehensive bill and maybe a model for the whole country to look at. I think the Senate may scale back what it's going to do and actually consider in committees. Our committee may be very limited in the number of bills that we actually take up and consider passing out of the committee. We've got a couple of judicial confirmations to make. And then the liability bill. I'll mention another thing too, Bradley. You were talking about just in general what the legislature is going to focus on. We got the 800-pound gorilla in the room is the budget, and we've got to pass a fiscally responsible budget. It's going to be painful as well. There's no way to avoid the pain that's coming with the cuts that we're going to have to make. With the drop in revenue. So I would expect, again, that to be a big focus of the legislature, as well as the liability protection bill.
Thank you very much, Senator Bell. We'll go to Chairman Boyd.
Yeah, thank you, Bradley. Because of the restriction in the Senate on the bills that are being heard, a lot of the bills that were flowing through my committee have been or are being taken off of notice. So I think we're not going to see a lot of activity there, and that's probably a good thing. I've often said not every bill needs to become law. So I'm actually excited to see some of those go away, but there were a few other good ones in there that I'm sure will get picked up next year. Just to kind of reiterate what both of the chairmen have said, I think that liability bill is paramount. It's something that absolutely has got to be accomplished when we go back in June, and not only to protect employers against workers' comp related lawsuits from their employees, but also to protect businesses from lawsuits from the consumers. So I think that's very important. Depending on what caption that opens, I think that's going to go through judiciary. I don't think it'll be something that we'll handle, but it is possible depending on what caption gets opened up in that. I think this is something that we mentioned last year in passing when the Department of Labor came and briefed our committee, and the unemployment folks came and talked. We had a kind of a side conversation, and it was discussed. Right now, twice a year, they sort of check the temperature of the unemployment trust fund. And the question was brought up, is that frequent enough? I mean, should we have an economic downturn? And this was before COVID-19. The question was asked, should it be done quarterly? When you're not expecting something like COVID-19, it's easy just to kind of dismiss it. But that question has come up again. And I know that there's some conversations going on there, and so would like to revisit that and talk to the commissioner and talk to leadership and see what their thoughts are on that. And I think that last year the computer system that we have with for unemployment is very, very old. It's antiquated. And if you've struggled in your districts, I'm sure that many of the panelists are like me. Their LAs and their offices have almost become unemployment offices, trying to help people get on unemployment insurance. And a lot of that is due to our really old unemployment computer system. And we had requested about $41 million in the budget to modernize that. And so I did speak with Commissioner McCord a few days ago, and we brought that up again. And he said, with the reduction in the budget, I'm not sure we're going to get that. But I'm actually hoping that having gone through this and everyone witnessing how painful it is and how old our system is, that maybe we can find the money in the budget to get a new computer system for the unemployment program in Tennessee. And then with regard to the budget, we don't know how long we're going to be there. I hear people say a week or two, and I hear people say a month, but I do hope that we're there long enough for the May revenue numbers to come out so we can get a good pulse. We saw in April, and of course the franchise and excise tax and the business taxes were kicked down the road to July. And so, I think that threw the number off quite a bit for the month of April, but I'd like to see what May numbers look like as we prepare the budget. And so that's something that I'm hopeful of. Thank you, Bradley.
Thank you very much. Senator Bailey?
Yes, thank you. So We have shortened our calendar down drastically in regards to the Commerce Committee. We had originally had about 70 bills remaining to be heard. A lot of those bills have been taken off notice. The chairman of the Senate committees have met with Senate leadership for the last several weeks, going over exactly what we feel like is ultimately important and something that needs to be heard as far as moving forward. So basically, the calendar that we'll be hearing the first week of June will be in regards to balanced billing, the Turo peer-to-peer car rental app, and then there's an ambulance reimbursement, some legislation. Those of you that are on the call know that we're helping our EMS workers on that, and there's just a little technical issue that I understand that we've got to get worked out on that. So the Senate has really pared down its committee calendars. I know the House is wanting more extensive legislation passed. I guess that'll be up to Senate leadership and House leadership to ultimately work any additional legislation that's worked out. I'd like to go to something that Representative Boyd mentioned a few minutes ago. When Commissioner McCord was chosen as Commissioner of Department of Labor, he was one of the first commissioners that I met with, and I basically sounded the alarm at that time in regards to our unemployment computer system. The previous administration and commissioner of Department of Labor never heeded the calls from us legislators that knew that there was a problem. And I had mentioned that in my first meeting with Commissioner McCord, that he had to get control of it. I think they made some strides in trying to improve it over the year and a half that he had before we ran into this pandemic. And if he hadn't have, then we would have probably really been in trouble. But I agree with Representative Boyd. That's one of the areas that I think we've got to make an investment in, because it is constant phone calls to me and to my office over the last several weeks. I've still got people that have been waiting 9 weeks that still have not had their unemployment, and that's just not acceptable. I know we've ramped it up, but that's just not acceptable, because ultimately us legislators are the ones that are being blamed for that. And so I think that is something that we as a legislative body have got to address.
Thank you very much, Senator Bailey. Next, Representative Smith.
Thanks, Bradley. And echoing the clear common theme, and I think a priority is the concerns around the budget. But with those concerns, there are priorities that, just like this system to assist our workers, exactly what Chairman Bailey said. I've got workers that are desperate, and even entire businesses. We're talking 12 to 14 folks that are waiting 9 to longer months. So thank you for being a good echo on that. But relative to my the committee work within House Insurance, there is a balanced billing bill, again, that Chairman Bailey had mentioned. And the reason this is so important is because as people have become uninsured or unemployed and their insurance changes, there are some practices where people are caught with these quote, air quotes, surprise bills. And we're trying to remove patients from the center of this battle between the insurance companies and the providers and hold the patients harmless. But we need just to make sure that we don't inject perverse incentives into the market there. So that will be a priority bill. I know that in the Health Committee, I'll be carrying a bill of Speaker Sexton's for Certificate of Need reform. As we've watched several executive orders roll out over the course of this COVID response, we have seen that executive and emergency orders have had to be issued to change the regulatory environment to meet the need and capacity of some of these inpatient facilities. And so the response of COVID has shown us that there are needs of really good reforms that it's the time to do. I think telemedicine, I know that the Senator Swan in the Senate has worked a version on that side. It has passed. We have worked a version on our side, and I think we'll be headed to conference committee to make sure that we prioritize patients as well as providers on that. But one thing I think that this body on this call is very interested in is personally, I'm carrying the right to work constitutional amendment. I have met with the speaker, and in knowing that will be moving forward, it will be calendared. And so there are a lot of things that we're putting forward on the House side. Again, I think that Tennesseans have showed us that they can embrace the Tennessee Pledge and go back to work. And I'm glad that on the House side, we're doing that. I think the Senate's going to be very effective in getting the budget prioritized and some other things, but we've got to get back to work and really show Tennesseans that we're going to follow their lead.
All right. Thank you all very much. Your comments are very much appreciated, and the policies that you all outlined through your committees. So thank you all so much for your time today and your perspective. Your leadership is very valuable to the Tennessee Chamber and the business community in everything that you do, and we will be seeing you all very, very soon. So thank you very much. Next, we're going to move on to our next panel discussion, which is set to begin 11:35. And this is the Tennessee Business Recovery and Safe Harbor Coalition. Primarily, this issue gets to what we've heard a lot about, and that are liability reforms to ensure that Tennessee stays open for business and that businesses can open safely and be able to operate in this uncertain time. This issue really came up about two weeks ago, where the Tennessee Chamber and our strong partnership with the NFIB collectively started working to gather groups in Tennessee to join this effort. As of now, we have about 30 groups in Tennessee that employ, through their respective trade associations, about 2 million Tennesseans. This is the most important issue for them as that we start to approach the Tennessee General Assembly. We also note efforts at the federal level as well, with leaders up at our federal level in the United States Senate noting how important that even federal safe harbors are to enact. And there's a number of other states that we are tracking that are also considering this. So this is an opportunity for us to lay out this issue and put it really at the forefront for our June the 1st legislative session. With that said, we've divided up our 30 groups into about 4 different groups, primarily of different industry sectors. We're going to hear from 2 of those today. The first one will be the Tennessee Hospital Association, and then we're also going to hear from Tennessee Independent Colleges and Universities. The other areas that we have that we'll hear from tomorrow are the business community and also the entire hospitality and tourism sector. So with that said, I want to welcome Joe Birchfield, who's Senior Vice President with the Tennessee Hospital Association, to provide us some background on why this issue is so important for Tennessee's hospital industry. Joe, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Bradley. I appreciate the opportunity. Can't overstate the importance of this issue for hospitals and our other provider partners, the Tennessee Medical Association, of course, nursing homes, assisted living, other healthcare providers. The reality is that we are in a much different world, as we all know today, than we were even just 2 months ago. But the way the world has changed during that time, particularly in the healthcare space, has created some inherent risk, despite our best efforts to mitigate and, of course, ensure proper procedures and protocols. And those are pretty specific changes. Standards of care, particularly around treating COVID or suspected COVID patients. You look back to February when guidance really first started coming out, and almost weekly has evolved as we have learned more as a country and even internationally about the best courses of treatment, proper ways to protect healthcare workers and patients, things like that. And so as those evolve, you have a situation where a person who's treated today may receive a different course of treatment or a different type of care than someone who was in the exact same situation 4 weeks ago. And so in doing that, you end up with just a risk for liability there that we feel is very important to protect. We've also seen changes in locations of care as hospitals really scaled back elective procedures and ultimately canceled elective procedures, and also worked to just ensure that COVID patients were in distinct and separate places from other patients within our facilities. That resulted in some changes in the site of care delivery. And again, that inherent risk comes into play. We have also, as many of you are aware, had to furlough employees. Many of our hospitals have furloughed employees as a result of lost revenues from the cancellation of elective procedures and just decline in general in non-COVID utilization. And with those furloughs, you're using some clinicians in maybe ways that are broader or outside of their typical day-to-day work. And when we do that, we of course ensure training and make sure that folks are following appropriate guidance, whether that's state or federal. But again, when someone is working outside of their normal area and under certainly stressful and uncertain circumstances, it creates potential risk. And so we're not saying at all that we believe that someone who has willfully provided bad care or been grossly negligent, we don't seek protection in those spaces, but recognizing that in the normal course of providing healthcare services during this time, things have been very different. And as a result of those changes, those rapid changes, there is just an inherent risk there. The last thing I'll touch on is also the allocation of scarce resources. Thankfully, everything our state did flattened the curve, and we never saw the rush on hospitals that have been seen in New York or other parts of the world. But in preparing for that, there is also the acknowledgement that you may not have enough equipment or services or supplies to treat every patient. And in those instances as well, you have healthcare providers making very tough decisions and want to ensure the appropriate protections there as well. And you know, thrilled to be working with this broader group because this is a broad topic that has a lot of implications for a lot of industries. And our collective voice together, I think, really elevates the importance of safely and appropriately reopening the state and continuing to care for Tennesseans.
Thank you, Joe, and it's been good to work with you as well as our next panelist on this coalition. Our next panelist is the president of the Tennessee Independent Colleges and University Association, Claude Presnell. Claude, you're live. Go right ahead.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And Joe, it's good to be on here with you as well. I think a lot of the comments he made really transcend industry types in terms of the fluidity of the situation and how we actually approach the best practices related to keeping safe environments for employees, but in our case also for students. So the Tennessee Independent Colleges and Universities have 35 locations across the state. You probably know them more locally than you know them collectively, but from Memphis clear out to Bristol, we employ over 21,000 employees, but we also enroll over 80,000 students. And so the risk factors when you have an environment like a campus really are accentuated in the sense that we are extended contact type situation just by the nature of who we are. In other words, we're kind of mini cities, if you will. We have resident halls, we have cafeterias, we've got classrooms, and we're trying to partner with the state to be able to open as quickly as possible. A lot of our rural campuses are the economic engines in those county seats or in those rural communities. And so there's a lot of ancillary businesses that are dependent upon our campuses reactivating and getting back to normal as quickly as possible. So as Joe mentioned, the Safe Harbor Coalition is not seeking to protect any of the bad actors out there. If there are institutions or companies that are willfully seeking ways to basically thumb their nose, if you will, at best practices around this particular pandemic, they ought to be called out. But those companies and the campuses that are doing the very best that they can to implement safeguards according to what is considered to be best practices, whether it's through the CDC, through the governor's executive orders, through the Tennessee Department of Health, if we're taking the best measures that we possibly can, then we ought to have some liability protection. The last thing that we all need is to have our resources consumed by frivolous lawsuits on the front end. And we're all in a very tight financial situation. For many companies and even many of campuses, this is an existential threat to their existence. And if all of a sudden they have to reallocate resources to a legal front, then that's just going to deplete the resources that we have to focus on our mission and our purpose for our campuses. So we've got campuses looking at a number of different things. We're looking at the social distancing piece to make sure that our classrooms are set up in a safe environment. We're looking at what is that best practice for residential halls in terms of face coverings, in terms of cleaning stations and so forth. And we're scanning literally nationwide to see what those best practices are. We are leaning on the CDC guidance for this, and I know that the governor's office is interested in putting out a document for higher education community related to best practices, very similar to the Tennessee Pledge. So we know that's happening. I will say that this morning, actually a little over an hour ago, I was on a call with Senator Alexander. We asked them as a higher education community specifically if he was interested in doing something around liability protection. He echoed what Joe said, that the federal government, and in particular Leader McConnell, is saying that the next recovery package will contain some level of liability protection. And so our view is that we need the federal government to act. We need our Tennessee Business Recovery and Safe Harbor Act to take effect here at the state level. And we also need the governor to provide some executive orders around it. So we think that all of these things need to work together for adequate protection for those companies and those campuses that are doing the absolute best they can in a very fluid environment to protect the health of our faculty, staff, and our students.
Thank you, Claude, and both of you bring up really good points from your sectors today, and do want to point out what the group's working on is a very targeted, temporary, and timely approach to solving the issue, and we hope to be able to share specifics about the legislation with you very soon. On your screen, we did want to share with you earlier this month, we composed a letter to House leadership and Senate leadership, as well as members of each chamber and the governor's office. This is a copy of that letter, and you can see the associations. Now, this isn't including the independent businesses out there or the other businesses out there who are a part of the effort, but only the associations. There are lots of folks helping with this effort, and really appreciate that. And we scroll down a little, you can actually see a copy of the letter that was shared there, which basically reflects the sentiments that we've discussed with you here. That's the end of our agenda for today. We do want to thank you very much for joining us, and want to invite you back tomorrow at 10 a.m. We've got a really good agenda lined up for tomorrow. We are going to have, planning to have Governor Lee tune in with us to kind of give us a little bit of an update about what's going on at the Capitol and some of the next steps in terms of reopening, et cetera. So definitely looking forward to that. We'll also unroll our Tennessee Chamber special June session policy agenda to you. We've got our Eye on 5 issues that we want to talk to you a little bit about that are specifically related to the issues we are facing right now, and some of those that we didn't get to take care of because of the abbreviated earlier session. We're going to have our friend Mark Braden from Mercury in with us to talk about politics. Our political structure is going to look a lot different this election cycle, and we want to learn more about that and a little bit more about what's going on at the federal level. And Chairman Susan Lynn from the House Finance Committee is also going to join us to talk a little bit about what we're going to be looking at in terms of budget. We've heard it referenced a lot today, but we'll probably get more into the nuts and bolts of that tomorrow. We'll also continue this very conversation that we just completed, probably a more robust conversation, and we'll really hone in on businesses, retail, and hospitality tomorrow. So with that, thank you again, and we look forward to having you back again tomorrow at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. Thanks, everyone.